Genesis Rising, Book 1. The Children of Apep. Excerpt by Virginia Wallace. Good Lord, was it ever hot out here. Gerald turned off his lawnmower, wiping a river of sweat from his forehead. It was all he could do to keep this old thing running. The shut-off switch had long since broken, so Gerald had to short it out by holding a screwdriver across the motor housing and the spark plug. Holding his aching back as he rose, Gerald headed for the nearest shade tree. How nice it must be, he thought, to get an allowance from one's parents. Alas, his parents' finances were heavily invested in beer and cigarettes, so there was never money left over for him. Gerald flopped beneath the tree. He opened his bottle of tap water, wincing at its uncomfortable warmth and disliking the sulfuric taste, but at least it was wet. After a long and rather unpleasant drink, he capped his bottle and leaned against the tree trunk, closing his eyes. This was Gerald's third summer working for old Mrs. Fitzgerald. She was away for the week, staying with her gentleman friend in Raleigh, Durham. But she did remember to leave Gerald's customary tin spot in the mailbox. He could take all weekend to mow this lawn if he wanted to. Slowly, ever so slowly, the clacking of the cicadas and the humming of the bees began to fade, replaced gradually by delicious, all-consuming oblivion. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, Shakespeare had once written. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. Gerald loved Shakespeare, which gave the bullies yet another reason to pick on him. He had nearly succumbed to sweet oblivion when something intruded on his dawning sleep death. "Hey, Gerald." He opened his eyes, shaking away his fatigue. "Hey, Gerald," piped the cheerful voice again. Kylie walked across the half-mowed lawn, waving. "I brought you some lemonade," she said. "Mom said you were here. She drove by earlier. Did I wake you up?" "It's okay," said Gerald sincerely, stretching as he straightened out. "That was awfully nice of you." Kylie took a seat in the grass next to him and adjusted her shorts as she sat down. She opened a small cooler and pulled out a thermos and 2 cups. Scooping some ice into the cups, she carefully poured 2 draughts of ice-cold lemonade. "Here you go," she smiled. "Sure is hot out, huh?" "Sure is," said Gerald, taking an appreciative gulp. "I think I may come back tonight and finish when the sun starts to set." "Sounds like a good idea," said Kylie, adjusting her ponytail. "What do you want to do this afternoon?" "I don't know. Any ideas?" "Not really. Let's just hang out." There was nothing Gerald wanted more. How he loved Kylie. The other pretty girls at school never strayed from their catty little cliques, from which they teased the boys and constantly made trouble. Kylie was just fun and normal. She sat in silence next to Gerald, appreciating the freshly squeezed lemonade. That was something else that Gerald loved about Kylie. She didn't always need to talk. Oh, she was still a girl at the end of the day. She could prattle on for hours when she wanted to, but not always. Sometimes she would just sit and appreciate the moment. It was early afternoon before Gerald and Kylie stirred themselves. The lawn was quite forgotten by now. In the sunny Carolina afternoon, blossoming in all its glory, and the cicadas serenading with their oddly soothing symphony. "Want to take a walk?" asked Kylie, holding out her hand as she arose. "Sure," said Gerald. He was a boy of few words, Gerald. He said, "Sure," but what he meant was, "There is nothing I'd love more than to spend the afternoon wandering around with you." He took Kylie's hand, giving her a freckled smile as they sallied beyond the shelter of the shade tree. "So where do you want to go?" "Dunno," shrugged Gerald. "Got any ideas?" "Sure," said Kylie. "Want to see somewhere weird?" "Weird is good," laughed Gerald. "Let's go see weird." Relishing that Kylie didn't let go of his hand, Gerald let her lead him away from Mrs. Fitzgerald's yard into the fields beyond. The unmown grass spread out around the two of them, blowing gently toward the swampy forest ahead. The Carolina sun was blotted from view as Kylie pulled Gerald gently across the root-studded threshold of the nameless wood. It was best to walk near the trees here. The hollows between them were muddy despite the seasonal lack of rain. "It's kind of creepy here, isn't it?" asked Kylie in a hushed whisper. "Yes," said Gerald bluntly, "but it's peaceful too." "I suppose," said Kylie. "There's a brook ahead, a little ways in. Just follow it." It was obvious that Kylie had been here before. That seemed odd, for Gerald would never have pegged her as a woodsy kind of girl, although she did like being outside. There was a sluggish, barely flowing brook nestled in the moss. Kylie pulled Gerald's hand gently as she turned to follow it, humming a little to herself. Gerald followed her in silence, stumbling here and there on the slimy moss as he followed the twists and turns of the languid brook. Kylie was as sure-footed as a doe, stepping deftly around every tripping hazard on the uneven terrain. The sun-drenched fields were far behind them now, and ahead loomed a forbidding barrier of brambles and half-dead trees. It almost seemed as though the interior of the wood had a wall within its shadows, an impassable bulwark protecting some mystery within. "I don't think we can go any farther, Kylie," said Jared nervously. "I don't see a way through that." "Of course there's a way through it, silly," laughed Kylie. "There are only trees and bushes. Come on, I'll show you. We're almost there. Can you hear it?" "Hear what?" Kylie rolled her eyes at him. Gerald cocked his head, listening to absolutely nothing. It was strangely silent in here. Even the cicadas had ceased their clacking, and the tree frogs had laid off their eternal peeping. He halted before the verdant wall, tugging at Kylie's hand. "I don't think we can get through that, Kylie," he said a little forcefully. "We might get stuck." "We won't get stuck," said Kylie, letting go of Gerald's hand. She turned to face him, sternly putting her hands on her hips. "Don't you trust me, Gerald?" "Of course I do." "Then follow me," said Kylie simply, offering her hand once more. Gerald ducked low as Kylie led him through the thicket. "Don't let go of my hand," she said. "If we get separated, it may be hard to get out again." "I won't," panted Gerald. The gnarled trees and brambles progressively became thicker and tighter until the wall seemed to become impassable. Gerald was about to plead with Kylie to turn back, when at last she pulled him through one final painful pricker bush. "We're here," she beamed, standing upright. Gerald was about to ask, "Where's here?" But just then, his eyes made sense of the sight before him. Beyond Kylie sprawled a vast valley, hollowed deep into the earth. But it wasn't a sinkhole or a bog. It was a lush, mossy valley festooned with flowering trees, whose aroma rose tantalizingly into the afternoon sky. Across the far side of the valley cascaded a glistening waterfall, falling in crystal-clear splashes into a sparkling pool at the bottom of the valley. "Come on," urged Kylie, tugging Gerald's hand again. "Let's get to the bottom." Reaching the bottom wasn't difficult. Limestone boulders, half buried in the mossy earth, made it easy enough to scale down the sloped wall of the valley. Before long, Kylie stood triumphantly at the edge of the pool. "Want to go swimming?" she asked. "What?" "We can always tell our parents we ran through a sprinkler to cool off," said Kylie reasonably. She pulled off her shoes and jumped in, shorts, t-shirt, and all, before Gerald could object. He watched her gliding across the bottom of the pool, only coming up for air once she'd reached the other side. The water was glass-like, nearly invisible. After a moment's hesitation, Gerald held his nose and jumped in. He wasn't much of a swimmer, per se, but his chubby form couldn't really sink either. Thus, he had never been afraid of deep water. "See? Isn't this fun?" laughed Kylie, spitting water as Gerald doggy-paddled about. He had to agree. The water was cool and clean, with none of the sulfur smell that usually tainted Carolina ponds. The afternoon passed by in a summery haze of laughter, splashing, and pleasant conversation. After they tired of swimming about, they climbed onto a rock to dry off. At last, Gerald noticed the sunlight beginning to fade. "I guess we better get going," he said reluctantly. Kylie nodded, rising beside Gerald. Both were still a bit soggy, but bearably so. Gerald took Kylie by the hand once more as they began their climb toward the hedge. Passing through the hedge seemed easier this time. That struck Gerald as odd, but he clutched Kylie's hand anyway, lest he get entangled. The way out of the woods seemed shorter than it had going in. They walked in companionable silence across the field, heading for town. While Gerald lived on the outskirts of Watsonville, Kylie's family owned a spacious home in its upscale neighborhood. Her house was closer. As the pair walked idly along, Gerald began to notice Kylie pulling his hand gently, steering him around the next corner. Why aren't we going that way? He asked. Kylie just looked balefully at him, her sky blue eyes clouding a bit. You're afraid of the crossroads, aren't you? Said Gerald. It scares you, doesn't it? Kylie turned, pulled her hand away, and crossed her arms on her chest. And you like it, don't you? She whispered. Yes, said Gerald, keenly aware that he was now voicing ideas and feelings that had heretofore only existed as ill-defined instincts. That made him feel very, very strange. Kylie looked away, shifting her weight on nervous feet. You were scared of the valley and the woods, weren't you? She asked timidly. Yes, said Gerald bluntly, but you got me through it, and we had a lot of fun. I swam all afternoon with you, and my elbow doesn't even hurt. Kylie smiled shyly at that. Okay, I'll walk the crossroads with you. Time to be a big girl, huh? That's right, said Gerald, taking Kylie's hand reassuringly. There's nothing to be afraid of. Kylie walked beside Gerald with hesitant steps. He could feel her hand trembling in his. He was tempted to smile, but refrained. She had encouraged him during his moment of fear. He could do the same for her. It seemed an eternity before they were well within the boundaries of that strange, compelling place. The street seemed oddly angled as always, and the light from the dawning streetlights was ethereal and not quite illuminating. There was nothing definably strange about this place, nothing at which one could point a finger and say, that's unusual. But it was strange all the same. Gerald stopped walking, giving Kylie a moment to adjust. You okay? He asked. I think so, said Kylie. It's not so bad here. What is there to be afraid of anyways? It's just a crossroads. But you were still afraid, thought Gerald. So were Travis and his friends. They're all afraid here, but no one can say why. Is there anything to do around here? I thought I saw some old storefronts when I went by. There's a comic shop around the corner, said Gerald excitedly. Follow me. Kylie followed with a bit more confidence this time, emboldened by Gerald's exuberance. I didn't know there was a comic shop in town, she said. I thought there was just Trilogy. Yeah, said Gerald. I just found it last night. Look. Gerald pointed toward the old storefront, all lit up as it had been last night. Something was missing, though. Something was different, somehow. Wait, hadn't there been a weeping willow tree here last night? Right in front of the store? Planted on the easement between the street and the sidewalk? Where was it now? Had he simply imagined it? Had it been some semi-lucid dream born of fatigue? Hey, check it out, said Kylie excitedly. It's a jewelry store. Gerald stared in confusion. Where was the comic shop? Had it vanished along with the willow tree? Was he going crazy? Sonnet's Baubles, read the sign over the lighted window. Before Gerald knew it, Kylie had pulled him inside. Look at all the pretty jewelry, said Kylie breathlessly, running through the displays. Gerald simply looked at her in bewilderment. Where was the comic shop? Look, Gerald, said Kylie, lifting a bracelet from one of the shelves. Look at everything they have. It's all cheap, too. Gerald had no frame of reference from which to define cheap, since he didn't make a habit of shopping for jewelry. So he followed his adored friend as she excitedly picked through all the displayed jewelry. He didn't understand her excitement, her fascination with all the pretty things. He just followed her because he loved her. Gerald had settled into a mindless, shuffling two-step as he walked a few paces behind Kylie. He was startled when he nearly smacked into her. Something had stopped her in her tracks. Oh, Gerald, look at this, she cooed, wiping a damp curl from her forehead. Gerald tried to look interested as Kylie held up a necklace. Isn't it pretty? Blurted Kylie, her blue eyes stern as she silently demanded Gerald's assent. Yes. The funny thing was that it really did catch his interest. What Kylie held up was a pendant forged from silver, overlaid with iridescent mother of pearl, and hung on a silver chain. The pendant was a serpent with its tail coiled. Its mouth was menacingly open, and its pointed teeth bared. Gerald could almost picture venom dripping from its fangs. But this was an odd serpent. It had wings, and it was the wings that were overlaid in shimmering, multicolored mother of pearl. Gerald stared in wonder at the necklace. That's really cool, he said sincerely. Yeah, said Kylie firmly, adjusting her soggy shorts. "It is. I'm going to ask how much it is. Maybe Dad will get it for my birthday." Resuming his two-step once more, Gerald followed Kylie to the counter. There was a bell sitting there, a tarnished, dingy thing. Beside it sat a yellow card that said, "Ring bell for service." Kylie rang the bell, and Gerald jumped as its dull tinkle echoed throughout the shop. An old woman, as wrinkled as she was stooped, emerged from the back room as though she had been waiting. "Yes, dear?" she cackled. Gerald stared at the old woman. There was something familiar about her face, but not really. She was so old that she was completely nondescript, except for her eyes. Her pupils shone in an eerie shade of rust red. They were certainly not the clouded, watery eyes of an old woman. They were young, and they looked alien amidst such an old, weathered face. "What can I get for you, young lady?" asked the old woman, wheezing as she spoke. She clutched her cloak closer about herself as though the North Carolinian summer felt cold to her. Gerald expected Kylie to ask her a question, but she didn't. She looked confused, as if interacting with a denizen of Gerald's strange crossroads had suddenly frightened her. "How much is this, please?" asked Gerald, gently taking the necklace from Kylie's hand. "You're in luck, young man," said the old woman. "I am?" asked Gerald, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. "Yes, sir," laughed the old woman. "You want that pendant, do you?" "Maybe, ma'am," said Gerald. "She wants it," said the old woman, cocking a frazzled eyebrow, "which means that you want it for her, yes?" Stammered Gerald. "I don't know." "No," said the old woman decisively. "No, you don't know. But someday you will. For now, we will just say that you want it. That means you want to know the cost, yes?" "Yes, ma'am," said Gerald politely. The old woman leaned over the counter, close, ever so close to Gerald's ear. "It's $10, she whispered. "No tax. But it's not just any $10, young man. It must be $10 soaked in the water of a secret place, a hidden place." Gerald drew away confused. "What?" he said. The old woman leaned in once more. "But you cannot buy the piece," she whispered, "unless you feel a connection with it. And there's one more thing. You must love the young lady to whom you give it." Gerald took a step back, dumbstruck. "Well, young man?" asked the old woman. Gerald stared at his shoes for a moment, and then looked at Kylie. She still looked a bit nervous, as though this situation made her ill at ease. Before he knew it, Gerald was fishing in his pocket of his shorts. He felt a moment of panic, fearing that he'd lost the object of his search while he'd been swimming. But no, there it was, the soggy 10-spot that old Widow Fitzgerald had left in her mailbox for him. He slid it across the counter as Kylie beamed at him. Gerald was about to say thank you when the old woman grabbed him by the collar and yanked him close. Gerald panicked as she began whispering into his ear. "What is done, young man, cannot now be undone," she whispered vehemently. "You have made a covenant, one that will not be consummated for many a year, but the day will come, as surely as the sun rises in the east. You made another covenant last night when you took the book, and the day will come in which you must pay the piper for that one too. Now go, young man, and may the ages be kind to you." Gerald backed away from the counter, frightened. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered. He took Kylie's hand, placed the pendant into it, and pulled her fingers closed around it. "This is for you," he whispered. "I hope you like it." Then he protectively pulled her away from the counter. "Thank you," he repeated to the strange old woman. He didn't say another word until he reached Kylie's house. He let go of her hand as he prepared to say goodnight, watching the pendant around her neck shimmering in the moonlight. "Thank you, Gerald," she said softly. "That was ever so sweet of you." Her gratitude was worth the 10-spot. "You're welcome," he said sincerely. And thank you for showing me your secret place." Kylie said nothing, but Gerald closed his eyes as she gave him a kiss on his chubby cheek. "You're welcome, Gerald," she said, "and good night." Gerald floated home on weightless feet, elated by Kylie's affection. He loved her, whether he could admit it to himself or not. But the old woman's prediction still left him feeling uneasy about Kylie and his relationship with her. What had she said? "The day will come